All right, welcome to my TikTok class. Today we're going to be talking about diversity in White Chicks. It was a movie in 2004. This is going to be our first, topic. It's going to be an OB analysis. So we're going to have a couple of theories in here that we're going to talk about. First, let's start off with what kind of phase we are going to look at in the movie primarily right now. That will be number two in the timeline, or the film plot, if you will. You can look right here. We're on transformation. There are a lot of aspects of diversity that happen later on, such as arrival in the Hamptons. That's a lot of the area where sort of like issues coming from not understanding diversity, but looking at the area of like phase two, as I'm calling it, where they first transition from male to female and black to white. We can see a lot of the differences in the way that diversity works. And so let's start off with the idea that diversity is context dependent. This is inside of our class book, but also there are a couple of research papers that focus on this, such as Gergen and Joseph in 2004. It was talking about how the way we act and the way we are seen, surface level versus internal diversity, or external versus internal diversity. If you want, I can do a little I for internal and external, EI. External diversity might be like the color of my skin, the color of my hair, the way that I talk. And then internal diversity might be my values, my personality, and other things like that that aren't very visible in the beginning of when you meet someone. This also factors into immediate characterization, where we take the external values of how I look, or how I act and how I move, my nonverbal cues, and my facial expressions, kind of play into like how we handle diversity within the workplace, and then also just in our daily life, and how immediate categorization, which is also found in our class book, but also can be found being researched and proven in studies by Harrison, Price, and Bell in 1996. This immediate categorization can lead to discriminatory and misogynistic practices inside the workplace, or just out on the streets. So first, let's look at the change. This section is called transformation that we're looking at. There are different types of discrimination that are happening in the switch from male to female. There's different changes that is happening through speech and behavior patterns, not only in male to female, but also in black to white. And so like the types of discriminations and speech and behavior changes happen in both categories, one more drastically in different areas than the other. Looking first at race, the large transition was from black to white, or African American to white presenting. And this was the Copeland brothers' first challenge, in the way that they switched their identity. There was this scene where they were being painted white, and this kind of represented the change in external, diversity, but not really internal diversity. They still acted the same. This can be seen on their way into the Hamptons in phase three, where they were walking in and they got catcalled, and they were, both of them in separate occasions, started beefing up, if you will, or trying to press onto whoever was trying to catcall them, instead of perhaps the more perceived feminine way of ignoring that catcalling, or yelling, but not necessarily in an aggressive way, physically, but like in an emotional way, with conversation and stuff like that. And so in this change from black to white, we can see cultural and linguistic differences. This is the easiest to pinpoint when the Copeland brothers, now that are Brittany and Tiffany, are playing music. They played rap songs in the car with their three friends that they had met. and they started saying the N-word and stuff like that. But also there were differences in music tastes that can be seen, and just like general differences that were categorized to be mainly African American or black, where it was more down to earth, maybe more rap style, and then the switch to being like an affluent Hampton white chick, where there were more pop songs. There's this scene where it goes da na 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 na, and I need you, and so that's those switch between like songs is a subtle way of showing that the difference of how they are supposed to act extrinsically is there, and it's or not there, it's very present. We can also see this with like an assumption with Latrell. The Copeland brothers, one of them goes on a date with this guy named Latrell, who has been pursuing this girl Tiffany, which is one of the Copeland brothers, fervently, and he buys her for a date night out, and it is assumed that he wouldn't like the music taste where it is pop and all this, because Latrell is an African American man who is buff and very masculine. And then it switches to Latrell going da na 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 na, and I need you, kind of to show that not every external and immediate categorization of the external, like skin color or male or female, type of diversity or traits is always correct. So kind of just taking those into account on the race factor of a big way that diversity showed itself in white chicks, just the different ways that people were not necessarily how they seemed on the outside versus how they actually were on the inside. And then moving on to gender, this was also a major switch from male to female. There were physical and emotional differences. Obviously there are physical, but not necessarily in the way that you might be thinking of, they might have long hair compared to where it was like short. No, there was a lot of differences in the way that they were supposed to walk. They were supposed to handle other people during like handshakes and stuff like that. And then also their voices. There's this one laugh that goes, and that is Brittany and Tiffany's way of laughing as women, where it is more high pitched, because they also have to start talking like this and like more like a woman the entire time that they're talking. And so not only the physical difference between switching the genders of these two Copeland brothers, but the emotional differences. We can see that how emotion is supposed to register on these Copeland brothers' faces as they are women is a lot different in the way that they would naturally do it, especially in the beginning of the movie, compared to later on in the movie when they develop a sense of being affluent white chick in the Hamptons. And so two very specific cases that we can see in the movie is first the sleepover attack. When it comes to physical, this was essentially where two men had burst into the room after knocking and were trying to pin down one of the Copeland brothers. This was for a stripper scene. There was not a stripper scene in the movie. It was registered as an attempt at kidnapping, which was the whole reason that the Copeland brothers were kind of pretending to be the white chicks, Brittany and Tiffany. And so physically speaking, the Copeland brothers were a lot stronger than Brittany and Tiffany, and so when it came down to them fighting the pursuers before they knew that they were strippers, one of the women started defending herself and throwing around these men, and then all their friends come in and they're surprised to see that the Copeland brother had been defending herself and that actually their plan had gone awry because it was supposed to be a male stripper. Looking at the emotional difference, we can look at small social issues that had happened. There was a fight between the Copeland brothers as the women and Vanessa, kind of their enemy, if you will, or nemesis. And this was where they had a diss off and then later subsequently were put onto a very bad table within the dining room. They were next to the dirty dishes. People have been bumping into them and it was messy. And this registered very deeply and socially, or deeply for the three women who were not the Copeland brothers. They were their best friends. And so it registered a lot for them, but the Copeland brothers really didn't understand why it was an issue, because they figured it was something that needed to be taken care of, that Vanessa was trying to like kind of pull up on them, if you will. And so it didn't register until later that those issues were something that, socially speaking, women were expected to have a lot of emotional register in. But later in the movie, we can see that these social issues become something that develops into an important issue for the Copeland brothers as they, adapt to being white women or white chicks. All right, and so kind of looking deeper into diversity, with this, the white chicks, we were talking about surface versus deep, intrinsic or extrinsic versus intrinsic. Let me put an E there, an I, just in case, So when we look at surface level, we obviously talked about skin and gender being a lot of the big changes, but later in the movie we can see values and personalities becoming a big change for these women. There were changes, like we talked about the emotional registers, from going from man to woman, about how social issues were not seen in the beginning as an issue. The fight with Vanessa, as I said earlier. But as we go along into the timeline, we can see that it became a personal issue for the Copeland brothers when they were trying to support their friends. One of the women, if you will, 1W, had an issue with a man who was not treating her correctly, and this became a lot more of a personal issue as I said, they moved through the movie and became closer with their friends that they had been, technically lying, or not technically, that they had been lying to about being, a white woman. There is research, and it is also an OB concept, that deeper diversity and inclusion is a lot better for not necessarily productivity, but that can be a big factor. But it is also very big in the sense of inclusion that comes along with being a part of a company. So if we were to take White Chicks and look at a company where there is a black man who turned into a white woman, or not even that, where there's a group of people who all have varying characteristics, we can see that as we move from surface inclusion, where we might have like a lot of different genders and skin tones, or ethnicities, when we move into deeper diversity, such as values and personality, within the workplace, it can inspire a lot of productivity and inclusion, which then creates a lot of more creative solutions within inside the company, or innovation. But it also creates a deeper sense of belonging. Which is very important not only to retention, but also just in general, being a good company, and stuff like that. The research can be found in the book, but also in studies done by Randall Chung and different authors, because obviously there are a lot of people that work on that. But as I said, as we look throughout the movie, this change from surface level to deep inclusion with that diversity aspect leads to creative answers, inclusion, and a sense of belonging, and therefore a bigger sense of like commitment, if you will, which is very important to the developing progress of the Copeland brothers inside of the White Chick storyline. Thank you for watching our first video about diversity. And so, just final addressing advice within the workplace, right before I end it, focusing on deep level diversity and inclusion will result in a lot better outcomes than just surface level. And again, that can be found in the research mentioned beforehand. Have a good day. See you on our next episode.